What was China's Century of Humiliation? The Century of Humiliation, its literal meaning in Chinese, translates as 100 years of national disgrace, was a period of Chinese history that began during the First Opium War and did not end until a century later when, in 1945, China, then known as the Republic of China, emerged from the destruction of the Second World War as one of the Big Four permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. This century-long period is typified by the decline, defeat and political fragmentation of the Qing dynasty and the subsequent Republic of China before it became the People's Republic of China in 1949. This period is marked as one of foreign intervention, annexation and the subjugation of China by Western powers, Russia and Japan. The characterization of the period as a humiliation arose within an atmosphere of Chinese nationalism that opposed the 21 demands claimed by the government of Japan in 1915. This Chinese opposition grew further with protests against the Treaty of Versailles, where China viewed it was treated poorly. Both the Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party popularized the term in the 1920s, protesting the unequal treaties and the loss of Chinese territory to foreign colonizers. During the 1930s and 1940s, the term was commonly used to describe the Japanese invasion of China. History. In the 1920s and 30s, the Century of Humiliation was dated to the mid-19th century and the First Opium War, amid the dramatic political unravelling of the Qing dynasty. Some of the key events were the trade of opium into China from the early 19th century and the British occupation of Hong Kong. The looting and sacking of the old Summer Palace in Beijing would bring an end to the Second Opium War. The signing of numerous unequal treaties, followed by the Chinese being defeated in the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894-5, which resulted in the Japanese occupation of Taiwan and seizing the Korean peninsula, followed by the Russian occupation of Liaodong in 1898 and the Eight-Nation Alliance that led to the Boxer Uprising of 1899 to 1901. The Russian invasion of Manchuria in 1900, which was followed by the Japanese invasion of Liaodong during the Russo-Japanese War of 1905 and the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, whereby German territory in China was handed over to Japan, which led to the May the 4th movement. And finally, this era ended with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931-2, which was then followed by the Second Sino-Japanese War from 1937 until 1945. In that period, China suffered major internal fragmentation, losing just about all the wars it fought, which resulted in the payment of concessions to the great powers that had invaded Chinese territory in these unequal treaties. In addition to the payments, China was forced to open its ports for trade while leasing or ceding territories. End of humiliation. After the Boxer Rebellion had reached its conclusion in 1901, some of the Western powers came to the decision that they had acted in excess and that the protocol was too humiliating. As a result, the US Secretary of State John Hay formulated the open door policy. This policy prevented the colonial powers from directly carving up China into several de jure colonies while guaranteeing universal trade access to markets within China. With the intention of weakening Germany, Japan and Russia, it was only partially enforced until being broken by the resultant warlord era and interventions from the Japanese Empire. The semi-contradictory nature of the open door policy was noted early, as although it preserved the territorial integrity of China from foreign powers, it also led to exploitations in trade by those same countries. The USA and Japan upheld the open door policy through the Root-Takahira Agreement in 1908, but other factors such as immigration restrictions as well as the assignment of Boxer indemnity to a managed Boxer indemnity scholarship instead of being directly returned to the Qing government, led to a continuation in humiliation from a Chinese perspective. In the era of the Chinese mainland being known as the Republic of China, the 1922 Nine-Power Treaty was a major attempt to reaffirm Chinese sovereignty, although it failed to check the expansionism by Japan and had a limited effect on extraterritoriality. The open door policy itself was ultimately dissolved during World War II after Japan's invasion of China. Extraterritorial jurisdiction and other privileges were abandoned by the United States and the United Kingdom in 1943. During World War II, Vichy France retained control of their French concessions in China, but were eventually coerced into handing them back, and the Sino-French Accord on February 1946 affirmed Chinese sovereignty over these concessions. Chiang Kai-shek declared that the Century of Humiliation ended in 1943 with the abrogation of all unequal treaties, and Mao Zedong further confirmed the era had ended when, in the aftermath of World War II, China took its place among the Big Four of the victorious Allies in 1945. Commentary, criticism and conclusion. Historians have judged the vulnerability and weakness of the latter years of the Qing dynasty's failure over foreign imperialism in the 19th century to be based mainly upon the weakness of its maritime navy. However, it had achieved military success against Western aggression on land. At the start of the First Opium War, China had no unified navy and no apparent realization to how vulnerable the nation was to attacks from the sea. British naval forces at that time sailed and later steamed wherever they wanted to go with ease. In the Second Opium War of 1856 until 1860, the Chinese had no way to prevent the Anglo-French Navy from sailing into the Hai River and attacking the Taku forts in 1860 and landing as close as possible to Beijing. The reverse was reflected in the Chinese armies on land using not exactly modern weaponry in suppressing rebellions within China, bluffing Russia into a peaceful settlement on its disputed borders in Central Asia before defeating the French in the Sino-French War of 1884 to 85. But the defeats at sea and resulting threat to steamship traffic to Taiwan forced China to conclude peace on unfavorable terms. The historian Jane E. Elliott was critical in alleging that China refused to modernize or was unable to defeat Western armies as simplistic, whilst adding that China embarked on massive military modernization in the late 19th century after several defeats, even buying weapons from those Western countries that had inflicted defeat. The Chinese also manufactured their own arsenals, such as the Henyang Arsenal during the Boxer Rebellion. Elliott further questioned the claim that Chinese society was traumatized by the Western victories, as many of the Chinese at that time, up to 90%, lived a rural existence and were outside the lives of those in the cities of concessions. Those rural citizens largely continued their day-to-day lives uninterrupted and without any feeling of humiliation. That brings us to the end of this video, highlighting a historical era that has helped shape China today. If you've enjoyed watching and it's shown you a little detail of life and events here in China, then your subscribing to my channel would mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching. Make sure you click on the link to the next video, and until the next time, goodbye for now.